So, a lot of people seem to really want to know my opinion on the latest overdress episode, but I've been knowing this whole time, dude. What y'all don't know about me is that my favorite Fire Emblem character is Celica, and my favorite male Fire Emblem character is Alm, and they're married. And you know what? That's the best part. In this house, we support a lady that actually knows when to make moves and enter a relationship. I may have been a big supporter of Ren and Asaka or Naoki and Maki, but they never did shit, man. I'm done with all that socially awkward kind of stuff. If my girl knows how to actually, act like a social being with another person, actually be in a relationship, that's a thumbs up from me. Anyway, let's talk about Orfist. Enough of that. Today we're going to do a deck profile on Mr. Orfist. So this is, of course, one of the Brandt decks. From DBTO1. This is with Japanese cards. The English release is in just a couple of weeks, of course, less than 2 weeks even, but I did order Japanese cards a while ago, and I've been kind of playtesting and playing here and there, playing remote fight, playing at home here and there. And so I'd like to talk to you guys about my list. I'm pretty happy with it overall, and while it won't be as in-depth as some other decks may receive in terms of treatment, because I haven't had as much time to focus on really playtesting different matchups, I have played against a variety of decks, but I just can't say that I've played against everything, right? So I will talk about what is within my experience, and of course tell you some tips about the deck that you should know if you're planning to build it. And of course, as usual, do a little bit of a mulligan, as well as some, this deck doesn't really have combos, I guess. It's not really a combo kind of deck. It's just literally like, the early tempo. So I'll tell you about those situations. But anyway, let's get into the deck profile and talk about it. Of course, before even talking about the deck, one of the things you're going to have to prepare is the Shadow Army tokens. These cards are very important. They're just 15k, 1,000 grade 1s, basically, that are spawned by Orfist. And I would say prepare 5 of them, because oftentimes your board will have 5 of them. And so therefore, they're really good. Obviously, that's the main gimmick of the deck, so that's very, very important. Don't forget to buy them if you're buying singles, and don't be like me who bought one and has to proxy the rest now. All right, this is my first time doing a deck profile for overdress, so I guess we're going to be talking about the Rhyme deck first. So let's just get into it. All right, so I guess let's break it down like this. All right, damn, this is really a new wave, a new format for Vanguard, huh? Doing deck profiles like this with the ride deck and everything. All right, so let's get into it. Of course, the starter, you can use whichever one you like, but I do use the Fovi. I did pull an SP of him, so this is, of course, the starter for Orfist. Of course, same effect as all the other starters. If you're going first, when you ride over him, you draw a card. Then the grade 1 that helps you set up your first worlds is the Rutis. So his skill is when he's placed on Vanguard Circle, you can search your deck for a world card, which is a type of set order, and then add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. And on regular circle, his skill is when he attacks or boosts, if your world is a Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, then he gets plus 2,000 power. He's a 10k booster, and so that is also nice, mainly there for his Vanguard Circle ability. And then our grade 2, of course, this one is played at quite a few copies, is the Cubizia. This guy says when you play a world card in your order zone, you can choose one of your units and give it plus 5k. It can be to himself, it can be to anything on the field. Generally, this is the way that you push in the early game on turn 2 by calling down stuff and just giving it extra 5k and just basically bashing them. And then his second skill is during your turn, if your world is an Abyssal Dark Knight, then he gets plus 5k. So he's a 15k attacker when you have 2 set orders, basically. And finally, the trump card, of course, the grade 3 is the Orfist. So of course, his skill is during your turn, if your world is a Dark Knight or Abyssal Dark Knight, he gets plus 5k power. And when your world is a Abyssal Dark Knight, you can count +2 and then make 3 of those Shadow Army tokens and call them to your rearguard circles. So he basically spawns tokens while also being a pretty big stick himself, so that's also very nice. So the right deck is pretty simple. You basically just like search a world, turn 2 you play it and buff the board, and then on turn 3 you make tokens. Pretty simple. So let's go through the rest of the deck now, so just you guys know what the actual right deck looks like. I guess I'm going to keep this format going into it, and don't forget your right deck has to have different sleeves from the rest of your deck, so make sure you do that. All right, so to finish up grade 3s, of course, we're playing 3 of the Orfist. So of course, to persona ride all the time. I don't really call him as a beat stick. He can be an 18k beat stick, which is pretty attractive, but generally don't really need that much unless you're really pushing for game or you have like way too many. But even then, I would keep them in hand just because you actually get to persona ride consistently, and that's very, very good. Let me zoom in a little bit while we're doing the deck explanations. So yeah, just a good card. I think no explanation needed. Is your persona ride, so it goes without saying. Then the other grade 3 I play is 2 copies of the Jabbertail, I think it was called in English. So this card says if your world is an Abyssal Dark Knight, then when he attacks attacks, he attacks an entire column at the same time. So basically when you attack like your opponent's rear guard, you attack both the back row and the front row at the same time. Or if you attack your opponent's Vanguard, you also attack their booster. So I currently play him at 2. I played him at 3 for a very long time, simply because against certain matchups this is nice, right? Because in certain matchups you still want to be mostly bashing the Vanguard, right? This deck can definitely push pretty hard and doesn't really worry about, you know, having to like attack rears that much, or depends on the matchup of course, but generally you don't need to worry about that too much. But at the same time, like, there's not that many decks right now, in my opinion, at least from what I've played against, that actually like actively call out boosters behind the Vanguard that stick there. So, you know, if you think of Baron Magnus, it disappears. If you think of Bruce, it disappears, or they don't even call one. If you think of Nirvana, they technically don't really call a booster behind Vanguard unless it's like Tenchestead. So in that case, yeah, killing Tenchestead is nice. Zorga doesn't really call a booster. For Magnolia, it's kind of nice. You can kill their back row attacker, which is pretty cool. Against Police, Seraph Snow is the one thing that doesn't often have a booster. So you get what I'm saying, right? I decreased it to 2 copies because it just doesn't really come up in many cases, and just a 13k attacker without anything fancy behind it. So I think it's a cool card, but overall right now it's just not as necessary as some other ones. And then we're also going to look at our last grade 3, which is 3 copies of one of our world cards, which is the, ooh, I forgot the English name for this. This was like To Shirenu Yami no Nakade. It's like in the darkness that nobody knows, I think what was the English name. So this is an order card. If you haven't played Vanguard for a while, these are basically spells, and in Brandt they're basically like set spells. And so this card says you can play it in your order zone, which is just above your damage zone, by Soul Blasting 1, and then when this card is put into your order zone, you choose an opponent's front row rear guard and retire it. So Soul Blast 1 for a front row pop is definitely very nice. You know, this gets to, because this deck is mainly just bashing face, because you just want to push your opponent quickly, you play a very aggressive trigger lineup and everything, this is your one way to actually control your opponent's board. You can get rid of Verina Valientes, you can get rid of like Oldens, you can get rid of certain stuff like the Fasado, but overall it's just a nice card because it's Soul Blast 1 to pop something, so that's pretty good. And then in the order zone it has a continuous skill. If you don't have any other cards in your order zone that are not world, so it says here, oh, just in this little box that it's a world card, then it does the following abilities. If you have 1 world card, so just this for example, then you are in Dark Knight state. And then if you have 2 world cards in the order zone, then you're in Abyssal Dark Knight state. So basically when you play one of them in the order zone, just have 1, they stay for the entire game, you're in Dark Knight. When you have 2 of this or any other world card in combination, then you're in Abyssal Dark Knight. And if you have, you know, 3 or more, it's still Abyssal Dark Knight, so that doesn't change. So it's a good card, you know, just you want to have this, you know, just because it's a world, but also it's nice to replay it sometimes just to pop some pesky targets like Verina Valientes that have, you know, overdressed a bit too much and stuff like that. Then of course to finish up our, to start our grade 2 lineup, if anything, not to finish up, we have the remaining 3 copies of the Cubigia. So this card, in my opinion, you know, I talked about the effect already, but it's an important beater. It's a 15k attacker, so sometimes if you don't want to call out more tokens, for example, if you just have 1 open rearguard circle, you can just call this and it will basically do the same amount of work as a token, and it still has 5k intercept, so you can still intercept. So for that reason it's pretty cool, and that's also nice. Then this is a card that I've played at only 2 copies for a long time, and now I put it back up to 3. So this is the Drumler. So Drumler has an effect that you don't really use that often. Also, I'm trying out new oversleeves and you can see they're kind of slipping out, which I don't like that much. So Drumler has an effect which says when he's placed on rearguard circle, if your world is an Abyssal Dark Knight, so basically when you have 2 orders set, then you can +1 Soul Blast 1 to draw a card. I like cards like that have, you know, draw card effects, and you know, they just like self-replace. I think it's very, very neat. But at the same time, you generally just want to be counterblasting for either your defensive cards or for Orfist like generation of tokens, right? Because it's counterblast 2 to make 3 cards, whereas this is like counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1 to make 1 card, right? And it's like, yeah, it's nice. And sometimes when your opponent doesn't give you the 2 counterblast and you have, you know, you have just 1 CB to play with, but you have a counter charge in the back, you can use this, you know, just to draw extra cards. But honestly, just play this down on turn 2 if you need to rush. You know, the Cubigia powers up anything by 5k when you play a world order on turn 2. Just put this down even if you can't use it, just to give it 5k and bash. Honestly, like, that's genuinely quite fine. And then our last grade 2 is our 4 of world cards. So this is going to be the what was this one called again? I keep forgetting their names. Utsuronaru Tsukiyo. So we play 4 copies of this because it is an upstart goblin, as Solemn put. But the second part of the skill is the exact same as the other one. You know, in the order zone, you know, if you don't have any other non-world orders in play, if you have 1 world in play, you are in Dark Knight. If you have 2 or more worlds in play, then you are in Abyssal Dark Knight. But this guy says when you play it, it costs Soul Blast 1. But when you do, you draw a card, right? Soul Blast 1 to draw a card is really, really good, and I'm very happy to spam this card as much as necessary because it's self-replacing, right? The one problem with this deck is that, you know, because it spawns all of its attackers as tokens for the most part, you can guard with your entire hand, but then your hand can get filled up with these orders which don't have any kind of shield value, and so of course that isn't very nice. So every turn I generally try to always play this if I have it in hand, because I want to just like replace it into something that has shield value. Even if it's a trigger, it's fine, right? But it's a really good card because Soul Blast 1 to draw is always going to be very much appreciated. It's usually my search, you know, depends on my opening hand, but usually that's what I search with the grade 1 from the right deck. And then of course the most expensive part of this deck is the very important 4 of Mr. Bobo Mine. So I can't believe this is where Boba comes from. Crazy, I know, right? Can I get another damn that's crazy in the comments? So Bobo Mine is a grade 1 for Brandt, and his skill is very simple. At the end of the battle that he boosted, if you have a set order in your order zone, you can put him into the soul to countercharge 1. So this deck soul blasts quite a lot because, you know, both orders ask for soul blast 1, so this gives you a soul and also countercharges, so you can use your Orfist skill over and over again to keep spawning those tokens even if they get taken out. So this card is a super staple in Brandt because it offers those 2 resources, and in Orfist it's a 4 of. In Prison I would say you can get away with like 2-3 to be honest, because the counterblast depends on the matchup, but generally it's a card you really want to have, and so therefore it's really important, and the card is just really good. That's all I can really say, right? It's pretty simple. You don't really, it's nothing complicated, you know, it's not rocket science why this card is good, but of course as long as Brandt keeps having decks that work with the order zone, this will be a staple. That's all I'm gonna say. And speaking of counterblast and countercharging, I do play 4 of the useful rechargers. So this card definitely is useful. He definitely lives up to his name. This card I really love actually. At first I wasn't really thinking much of him, but he really grew on me. His skill is when you place him on Guardian Circle, you can counterblast 1. If your world is a Dark Knight, then for that turn he gains plus 5k shield. So he's a 10k shield, you know, just like Brody. But then if your world is a Abyssal Dark Knight, instead he gains plus 10k shield. So he's a 15k shield when you have 2 world orders. He's a 10k shield when you have only 1 world order set. So this is really nice because this is more shield power in your deck that other decks don't have, right? Other decks are packed with, you know, 5k shields, and you know their 15k shields are just their like crits, fronts, heals. In most cases it's only, you know, like crits and heals, whereas you have this, right? And you're pretty happy to spend that counterblast because you're only really counterblasting for Orfist in this deck, and you're countercharging with Bobo Mine, so you're generally pretty happy to use this skill, and it helps you. Just like this deck is basically like a tank that can do aggro. That's how you should be thinking of it, and I think that that really helps you picture how this deck should work as well. And then for PGs, of course, we're playing the new one. It's very good. You know, it's basically just a PG. You know, you discard for it, you know, to pay the cost. But of course, just like any PG from the booster set, it has the clause that if you have 2 or more cards in hand, then you discard. But if you have 1 or less, then you don't discard for the PG effect. So, you know, it's a PG, but of course, having that extra clause helps you in surviving certain matchups, especially when you have like only 2 PGs in hand, nothing else. Then let's zoom out for the trigger lineup here. So of course, goes without saying, we are playing 4 crit, 4 more crit, so that's going to be 8, and then we're playing 3 fronts because we don't really need draws in this deck because we basically just keep our hand all the damn time. And then of course the 4 heals and the 1 overtrigger. So of course the Brandt overtrigger says when you, of course, all overtriggers don't activate their extra effect unless they are drive checked. So the extra effect that activates is you double the power and critical of all your front row units. So it's a very powerful effect, and you know, it's probably the most explosive one out of them all in my opinion, and so that's very cool. But I play this very aggressive trigger lineup for the sole reason that you want to be controlling the tempo basically. Let me space this out a little bit so it looks a bit more attractive. There we go. Now we're talking attractive. So not attractive enough actually. There we go. So the reason why, you know, I play this very aggressive trigger lineup without any draws is purely because you're trying to finish the game really quickly, right? You're pushing them on turn 2, trying to get them to like 2 or 3 damage already, and then you're basically pushing them on turn 3 to get to 5 and then trying to win the turn after. And if you check front, if you check extra crits to like help you achieve that, that's even better. You know, if I could play 11 crits I would, because that helps me push them as much as possible, as early as possible, and then I can finish the game with my overwhelming 30k power, 40k power token lines, right? And you don't really need draws in this deck simply because, you know, you're plussing by default from Orfist skill, and you also have like draw effects in your deck as well, and so it's like you really don't need them, and rather you'd play the fronts that also have 15k shield because that helps you tank out anything your opponent throws at you and then just respond with your own tokens. So this is really a deck that can tank really well and then bounce back with its own aggression, and I really love that about it. So generally speaking, like your early game is basically just, you know, riding into this, this and then finding your world card, you know, adding it to your hand, and then, you know, the next turn you're basically going into the grade 2 and then basically calling whatever from hand to use an attacker, and then playing down your world card to use his effect to give it +5, so you can actually, like, you know, attack with 2 swings that basically either, you know, you can of course boost this with an AK to make 23, so it actually gets over defensives. You know, I did a video on magic numbers in overdress, and so getting over defensives is a very important part of that. And so basically, like, that's your early push, and then you're basically just going to Orfist after that. You know, this probably gets intercepted away, set up your second, you know, world card, and then you basically just, you know, use the skill, make your tokens, and then you start, you know, aggressing them. So the deck really works quite simply, but that important point of turn 2 rush is something a lot of people forget, and they just, like, basically they play like a sitting duck. They don't do anything in the early turns, and they just kind of wait until that turn 3 comes and they can make their tokens, and they don't really do anything until then. And I think that's the lesson you really should be learning here. All right, so we have our ride deck here together with the tokens, and then we have our shuffled up main deck here as well. So now let's take a look at a quick test hand and see how we're going to mulligan, and, you know, kind of give you guys a nice little tip on how to work with this. So, you know, I'm all blinged out in my almighty goodness because I already knew that this was going to happen, right? I am the number 1. All right, so of course, starter from right deck, set as our grade 0, and now let's do our mulligan. All right, let's do 2 dice. Gray one will be me and red one will be the opponent. Let's see who's going first. It's going to be the opponents. We're going second, so this deck is, you know, definitely better going first because you can start that rush a bit earlier, but it's fine going second as well. So our opening hand here. All right, so there's a few pointers here that we want to keep in mind, right? You generally want to mulligan for your grade 3, you know, for Orfist, in order to do your persona ride consistently. But another important thing to keep is your set world orders, because that's very, very important in order to actually have the 2 set up to use Orfist later. Even more important than persona riding. Can you believe it? We are going to keep one of the Cubigias here, I think. Actually, no, it's not that important. It's not that important. Although keep in mind that we are sending 2 grade 2s now to the bottom of the deck, so that's like 2 less we can draw into, but we should be able to draw into more early game attackers that will help us do the aggression. So let's draw 4. Draw into your over trigger as usual. That's, you know, just typical how it goes, and so we'll have to work with it, but that's fine. I feel like I mostly, whenever I play overdress, I always draw into my over trigger, which isn't bad, right? Better draw into it than not see it at all. You know, 50k shield is nothing to scoff at, so definitely happy with that. All right, so stand up Vanguard, and we're going second, so we'll draw an extra card as well. All right, so this is a case where you draw a few too many orders, so we're gonna just discard one of them for our ride deck and ride up into the grade 1. Let's first filter out another world card out of the deck using the grade 1 skill, and then we'll draw a card from the starter skill. You know, that ordering is important purely because you just don't want to draw into another order off of that, you know, so filtering out is good. And then starter skill, we're going to just draw an extra card. We get it. Hey, nice. We get a bit of a shield card, or alternatively, that's going to be just another card to aggress with. Sadly, on turn 1, the aggression is a little bit weak. We don't want to be just like hitting with, you know, into defensives and stuff. So I'll just swing with this 8k. We get a heal, doesn't go off, and that's fine. So then it goes back to our opponent's turn. We're going to take a couple damage, you know, maybe 1, maybe 2 is fine, and then we're gonna stand and draw for the following turn, and draw into more orders. Would you look at that? Crazy. All right, let's just keep discarding orders for the ride deck. That's absolutely fine. Go into the Cubigia, and so here, of course, we're going to start aggressing. And I mean, I don't really have any other cards to attack with, right, in hand, so we're going to have to call out this little recharger boy, and let's just play down the moon in order to turn it into evening time. So this is now, right now the game state is between, I would say, like 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. So it's still the evening, maybe 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., that kind of time range. So let's use the effect, of course, to Soul Blast 1 and draw 1 card. Draw into a crit, that's fine. And then, of course, his effect will give +5k to one of our units. We went second, so the opponent's Vanguard is already 10k. So we're going to just give it here to have like 2 attacks that try to break that sort of power. I haven't seen any of my front triggers yet, so I'm going to swing with the Vanguard first and then see what we get. And it's nothing. All right, if the opponent doesn't get defensive, we're going to swing with a 13, and that's our early little aggro. Whether they guard that or take that, that's fine. But we at least push them to 2 damage by now, right? So we're going to take in a damage here, and then, you know, start guarding probably. So they're going to start, you know, they're in turn 3, probably doing some stuff. Doesn't really matter what. You know, maybe they attack into our card because they don't want it sticking, you know, as a sort of preliminary, precautionary measure. I think that's what you're supposed to say. Anyway, stand and draw. All right, so here, of course, we have plenty plenty of worlds, and we have this grade 3 that we will have to call down this turn. We have a pretty nice hand to actually like do our first like set of tokens. So I guess here, well, let's just say they left up a rear guard, so I'm going to discard this order. You know, if you don't have orders in hand, you discard like great, you know, you generally discard like dead cards in hand. Like this is a good candidate for discards against a lot of decks. You know, the draw grade 2 is also a pretty good candidate, so that's also fine. So we go into Orfist, and of course, I think we can just, you know, already start out with just playing the order. And so we're going to Soul Blast 1 and then just put this down. So now we have 2 in play. So we are now finally in between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. So it is the actual night. And then we're going to use Orfist's effect to Counterblast 2 here, just like this, and then make 3 of these tokens in very specific areas. So we're going to just play them down like this, maybe move the world a little bit so we have more space. All right, and then we put our hand upside down, no problem there. And we can move down these cards now to basically just make a board of nice attackers. Now our column's already, you know, turn 3, we're already attacking with 28, 33, and 30. So that's also pretty good. We still haven't seen any of our front triggers, so let's just attack with Vanguard first. So it's going to be for 33. Let's go check Orfist for Persona Ride and a crit. That's also very nice. So we can give crit to Vanguard, power here, or something like that. They're both attacking for the same value in terms of shield, so that's fine. And then we can swing, you know, take out an opponent's like Vanguard booster or something, and this will be a 40k swing, so that's also very nice. Next turn comes and our opponent probably realizes that it's futile to be attacking into our rears. They just attack our Vanguard, and oh, front trigger, there it is. Who would have thought? And a crit trigger. Whoa, we got double defensive, so we should be fine now. I get rid of that massive glare on my damage zone though. And so now, you know, we can just like drop the rest of this hand, like, whoa, guard everything, crazy, super crazy. And then, you know, you just keep your Persona Ride and you resume your turn. You know, if they took out our rears, it's no problem, right? Let's say they did, right? Oh, drew into another Persona Ride. Let's say they did take out our rears, you know, use some kind of effect, but that's fine. We're going to just Persona Ride and draw a card from the Persona Ride into a PG, and then just use Orfist skill again. Even if you only need to like replenish 1 rearguard circle, to be honest, sometimes it's worth it. You know, so we make the last 2, and now we have 5. And so this is going to be swinging now for 43, and then basically going to just check. Front, nope. All right, but that's fine because we already got a front row buff from the Persona Rides. Is going to be 40 and then 40 again. Not a lot of decks can survive a lot of this kind of like big aggression, and so that's basically how the deck plays. And that's Orfist. So it's pretty simple, pretty easy to get into. You know, it looks like a mishmash of like Chaos Breaker and like Dark Zodiac and those kind of aesthetics, but in reality it's just basically a super tank deck that can go aggressive and push high numbers thanks to the Shadow Army tokens. You know, I don't have like super in-depth like, you know, matchup analysis and that kind of stuff in terms of what I'll be preparing for other decks, but I think once I get through some other decks I will do that for this deck as well. But I think generally this deck has pretty good matchups across the board. It's just very strong, and it can, if played right, it just feels really good, right? It's kind of like Zorga, where they don't play much from their hand and they can guard with most of their hand, and therefore, like, you know, your rears are still attacking for huge numbers. And so as long as you get that early tempo to like swing at them very quickly, the Shadow Army like columns become much more threatening, you know, much faster. And as long as you can dig into your Persona Rides with all those little extra draw cards as well, and the filtering that you get from the orders, then you should be good. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try my best to answer them because I have been playing this deck a fair bit. Also, if you still need to pick up any overdress cards, Parkage.com has actual singles for sale now, so you can pre-order your single cards for overdress already in English on Parkage. They generally match the Japanese prices as well, at least as they are right now, but in euros. So if you're in Europe, feel free to pick up your singles there as well for a pretty good price. You can also use discount code DifferentFight for a 5% discount at checkout. And hopefully you guys that like Orfist will be taking this to Springfest as well. I do look forward to seeing some of you guys there. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.